Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm Matthew Schutte. Nice to meet you. Can we start off by just giving a big round of applause to everybody in the room who's trying to tackle big problems? I work with a project called Holochain. We don't have the slides yet, so I'll probably skip through some of these when we get to them. Holochain is a free open source framework for building peer-to-peer applications, right? Apps that are run on just the devices of the users themselves. So you don't need blockchains, you don't need miners, you don't need stakers, you don't need giant web servers somewhere in Amazon's data warehouses. It's just your laptop, my laptop, maybe his cell phone at some point, playing whatever game it is that we want to play together, right? So basically we were a bunch of hippies. We had a different vision of the world that was possible. And a lot of what we were trying to do was not so much the, hey, I want to prevent the government from knowing what I'm up to side of things. I don't want other people to be able to prevent me from interacting in the ways I want to interact, freedom from constraint by others. We were mostly interested in freedom to constrain ourselves. All right, so I'm going to be talking today a little bit about the surprising advantages of peer-to-peer approaches to machine learning. I'm Matt. When I'm not working on tech, I spend a lot of time in the ocean. This was about, I don't know, a few years back. Phil, the photographer, he submitted this photo to the Big Wave Awards for largest wave of the year ridden by anybody on planet Earth. I didn't win, but it's nice to be nominated. You don't have to be a surfer to look at this and go, no. Or if you speak Spanish, no, gracias. Gracias, pero no. This looks dramatic, right? There's been a lot of photos of a lot of surfers like me on waves like this that have gone viral. It's this moment that goes viral generally, but it's not actually where the drama happens. Once you're on the wave, like you're in the middle of it. Either you're riding, you're wiping out, you're underwater trying to hold your breath long enough that you don't drown, but the die is cast at that point. This is actually the interesting moment. The moment when you come over some lump of water and you see this giant wall standing up in front of you, and everything in your body is saying, run, paddle as fast as you can to the horizon so that you do not die, right? And even after a decade, your body is trying to convince you that that's the right path. But if you do that, you're not going to catch anything today. And so you have a split second to decide, am I going to hold my ground? Am I going to make myself vulnerable and actually try? And if you do, you turn and you start paddling towards the rocks. This is a place called Mavericks that has a bunch of rocks in front of it. And if you wipe out, that wave wants to push you into those rocks, right? And you do everything you can to make it down that wave. Now, why do I surf? In part, it's because it allows me to lose myself in that experience. When I'm in this moment, I'm not thinking about the guy that cut me off on the highway. And I'm not thinking about the overdue bill to that vendor or anything along those lines. I'm completely in that moment, present. I'm sure a bunch of you have experienced this as well. Not necessarily in big waves, but you've experienced what the Greeks called ecstasis or ecstasy or losing oneself in other moments. For me, one of the other areas where I lose it myself is diving into how natural living systems function and then trying to borrow lessons from there in helping to architect new information systems, new systems for social coordination. One time I said this and this guy said, aren't we trying to get away from nature? Like, aren't we past that? I mean, he's like, I don't want to live in the wild, there's snakes there. Sure, nature can be relentless, it can be ruthless. But my take on it is pretty simple. Are we going to do things the hard way and try to invent stuff from scratch? Or are we going to take the shortcut and pay attention to the results after billions of years of relentless trial and error and winnowing of only the patterns that really work best? They aren't simple patterns. They tend to balance a bunch of different things in tension, efficiency, and resilience, for instance. But they're interesting patterns, and we can learn a lot from them. So me and my colleagues, a number of years ago, borrowed some of the patterns that we had noticed, specifically around how biological organisms, like a human body, does coordination, right? We have trillions of cells in our body coordinating coherently. Matthew is still Matthewing, 40-something years later, right? What's going on there? Well, part of that pattern is that they're all running an identical rule set. Actually, that's not true, not all. A large number of those cells, the superstructure, is running an identical rule set, the same DNA, right? There's also bacteria and all kinds of other organisms that have different DNAs that are part of that ecology. But that superstructure gets built up from a shared rule set, not a synchronization on data. Our bodies don't do global consensus. My left pinky fingernail is not paying attention to everything my right eye experienced, right? They are in consensus around what the game is that they're playing, what's okay and not okay, but they're paying attention to the local context for actually doing all of their activity. So we took some of that and we tried to borrow it, and we borrowed things from other stuff like BitTorrent and Git, right? From BitTorrent we borrowed distributed hash tables, which is a way of being able to put a file into a bunch of computers and later get it out, even if none of the places where you originally put it are still online, right? And Git is a way that people coordinate mostly in doing open source software and other software development. It's a version control system. The thing that we borrowed from that is agent-centric history. I'm making a change to my own state. I'm the one editing this document. I might suggest that you also incorporate that, but it's up to you to decide, yeah, you know what, I'll take that and I'll change my own state. So we end up not with one global ledger, but with actually separate individual ledgers for each of the parties that are participating in an application, right? So Holochain, once again, is a free, open source framework for building rich peer-to-peer applications. I'll show some of the examples on those later on. One 30,000-foot view, we're working to enable people-centered applications. It's not everything we're doing, right? You can do IoT type stuff, right? Internet of Things, little devices talking to one another. But one of the main things that was driving us as a group, this bunch of hippies with long hair, was putting people in the middle, right? How does the web work today? We heard a bit about it from Matt. With the web today, you have web servers. Somebody's got to pay for those web servers. That generally means there's a company, whether it's Facebook or Uber or Zoom or Twitter or somebody else. There's a company who's in between you and your friends and family and colleagues, right? There's a corruption issue there that we're all kind of, we feel. But I think the bigger issue is not about corruption. It's actually about complexity. The issue is that when our way of being in relationship with one another doesn't just have to work for us, it also has to work for somebody else's business model. It really inhibits us from being able to try new things. It limits our ability to actually explore and evolve our mediums of communication, the structures, the channels of communication that we're able to use. So what is Holochain about? It's about that. It's about enabling people to structure their communications in any way that works for them. Anybody else who wants to play that game with them can. If any of them wants to extend that, maybe bridge between that and something else, great, they can. If they want to try something new, cool, they can take their copy of the code and the data, change it a bit, do a new version, fork it, walk away, right? That, for us, is important because it enables an evolution of our ways of being in relationship, right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to borrow from biology and make use of those patterns for enabling social coordination that has that same evolutionary capacity, as well as its ability to enforce whatever the rules of the game are that those parties have chosen to play together. So, why people-centered applications? I think I went into that just a second ago. What is Holochain not? It's not a blockchain, despite the name, right? Super confusing. You say to people, hey, Holochain. They're like, okay, what kind of blockchain is that? Nope, not a blockchain. As I mentioned earlier, we're not doing global consensus. It's not a platform. There is not one big Holochain. Holochain is not a platform. It's a pattern. It's just a way to build apps. If Matt built an app and he shared it with some other friends, I might not even know that that app exists, right? It's running on just their devices in a local encrypted network. They all know how to interact with one another. They're seeing everything, but the rest of the world is not. What does that mean? How do we make money? We don't. Holochain is something we gave away for free, right? This was a bunch of hippies trying to change the world. Now, there's no servers needed, there's no miners or stakers, there's no tokens or gas fees. For those of you who are builders, you're like, that seems interesting. And for those of you who are in the blockchain world, guess what? It plays well with blockchains too. You can do some of the things that today you're probably making use of things like Discord or other Web 2-based systems, and you can swap that out with a peer-to-peer backend that's okay with lots of data, okay with lots of communication and interaction, that's gasless. But for the things where you want to access a liquidity pool or there's just something else you want to do on the blockchain, great. All these things are signed. It's a decentralized architecture. It plays well with those too. So truly peer-to-peer applications. Now I want to be clear, I've got no beef with tokenized protocols, okay? So for those of you who are like, but, no, I'm okay with it. It's just, it didn't fit what we were trying to bring into the world. I'm a big fan of the work, lots of different protocols that have gotten funded thanks to some tokenized protocols around the Filecoin Foundation. Similarly, the Ethereum Foundation, right? These people are doing really good work, and that work wouldn't be out in the world if it wasn't for tokenized protocols. That said, non-tokenized protocols are not rare, right? They're all over the place. The internet was built on them. This gentleman, Vint Cerf, I'm going to be seeing him this weekend in Silicon Valley because I'm going out to help volunteer for the 50th anniversary of the internet. He's one of the two co-authors of TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol, that is one of the core protocols of the internet. But there's going to be a whole bunch of folks there, the whole old guard, kind of celebrating the protocols and the history behind how they all created that stuff with Stanford Research Institute and Xerox PARC and all of that, right? Cool. How are we funding ourselves? Host. Our nonprofit organization is the sole owner of a for-profit service offering called Holo.host. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here because it's not super relevant, but just to share, this is a peer-to-peer web hosting marketplace that we've stated we are going to be launching in the next 5 months. That seems quick. It wasn't quick. It took us like 7 years. Back in 2018, we raised about $20 million in an initial community offering, an ERC20 token pre-sale. And the crypto world doing what it does, that went up and down, and at present it's worth a few $100 million depending on the day. That's what gave us the resources to build not just Holohost, but the larger Holochain ecosystem. Here's some of the applications you can play with today in Holochain. You can go to theweave.social if you're interested. Some of these are Kanban boards things, there's a tabletop board games thing, there's a Zoom-like thing, there's a Dropbox type thing, there's threaded conversations, there's spreadsheets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The interesting thing here is because it's peer-to-peer, anything you can read out of one application, you can write into another. So you're able to actually bridge between or interoperate across all of the applications. There's no server API needed. Okay, let's get into the AI side. So now that you have some understanding of okay, so peer-to-peer applications, right? And they're free. Cool. So what's happening in the world of Holochain in terms of explorations around peer-to-peer apps and AI? Full disclosure, it's early days, right? There's a few of us that are geeking out on private phone calls, Zoom calls, etc. And we're exploring different ways in which you could use community-run applications to do things that are interesting in the world of AI. So let's talk about community training of machine learning models. I heard a question earlier that had to do with that. Yeah, you can do community training of machine learning models, right? You can have a group of folks who are going, we are all interested in refining a model that makes predictions about this type of stuff. We all have data about that. We all have computers. Okay, let's work together, right? If you have alignment like that, we all want this model, we all have the capacity to participate in training it, it doesn't get a whole lot more complicated than that, right? We're all benefiting from the commonly generated model that comes out the other end. If that's not the case, if there's not a perfect alignment, then you're going to probably want to create some kinds of financial structures, other sorts of incentivization schemes, so that you can incentivize people for doing particular forms of work and then outputting that to an external community that did not participate. One version of that is what I'm calling holographic machine learning. Back in 2017, Google pioneered something called federated learning. Federated learning was basically this idea that your cell phone is going to fine-tune, train a little bit, a model. That model could have to do with predicting the next bit of text. It might have to do with which of these photographs that you took is likely to be shared, right? But they didn't upload the data to Google's servers. They actually had the data stay on the customer's device, train a model, and then they shared the model weight sets, essentially a long string of numbers. And then they combined those model weight sets inside of their servers to create one big model from millions of contributors, right? Millions and millions and millions of people. Cool. Where's that getting used today? Mostly in the healthcare space context where people really do not want to disclose data. It might be illegal, right? Because of regulation, et cetera, to be disclosing medical information about people. But you would love to be able to better predict a heart attack or what might happen if this type of person takes this kind of medicine. What we're interested in with holographic machine learning is, okay, let's take out the server in the middle. Can you have a community do that? And I think the answer is yes. Right? We haven't gone too far down this path, but one of the pieces that I came up with not too long ago was I was confronted with the question of how do you deal with noise? What if you have members of the community who are contributing bad data? And in the machine learning world, for those of you who are familiar, right, 1% of bad data results in a much larger, maybe 10% reduction in your predictive validity of your model, right? So you don't want bad data, you don't want noise. What are we going to do? Well, instead of having that community converge to a single model, we're going to let them converge to multiple models. How? We're going to make use of reputation. Hey, I've published this model weight set. Somebody else goes and grabs it. They run it. It's 70% useful for me. They publish that. Somebody else comes and grabs it, runs it. That's 70% useful for me. Who else saw it that way? Oh, that guy did. What else did they look at that looked interesting? And with that, you end up having the community sort of clumping together into different regions. Where might this kind of thing be useful? My brother-in-law is Native American, right? He's part Sioux. When he eats corn, his blood sugar level doesn't do anything. My sister is not Native American, right? When she eats corn, her blood sugar level goes through the roof. Their bodies respond differently to this one input. That's a kind of context where you would see multiple models showing up. Why? Because the community is different, whether they're different genetically or they're different because they have different exercise patterns or you're doing something with languages and they have different accents or dialects, right? You don't all create one giant model, you end up with more specialized models. Moving beyond training, right now we're in this age of giant models, right? OpenAI, Google, Meta, etc. Even the open source ones are giant models. And you know what? You can't really run those giant models on your laptop, let alone your cell phone, not unless you have a really powerful laptop. I think that the future is going to look something more like this. Yes, we have those giant models, and we use those giant models to train smaller, more specialized models, right? Nature doesn't generally favor things that do everything, right? You don't have whales that fly, for instance, okay? You have things that fit in their context and do those jobs really well. So what are we going to see? We're going to see lots of smaller specialized models that can be run locally on your own device. We're seeing people already today interested in individuals training AIs on their own data, right? And AI is one of those places where scale helps. So coming back to that community training stuff, sure, I'm interested in my data, but if I can get my data plus all these other people's data, I probably get to a useful model much earlier than if it's years of me putting in inputs before the thing starts to pay off. Not on the training side. What about communities giving one another access to hardware models, machine learning models that is, and data sets, right? One of the ways in which you can augment a machine learning model is by retrieving additional input information dynamically, a RAG, right? Retrieval Augmented Generation. Cool. Holochain happens to be a good way for us, without having the costs all land with any one individual, for us to go, oh, I'm running this thing, there's an indicator that information's over there, great, pull that in, cool, now it's continuing to do its thing. Oh, you know what, we want a different model. What's the community say is a good model for this? Oh, probably that guy's thing. Okay, we're gonna go grab that thing. There may be incentive structures, there may be payment systems, right? You're gonna have a whole economy likely emerge within these machine learning communities, but that ability for us to make our hardware, for us to make our models, for us to make our data sets available to one another, I think unlocks some interesting things. Okay, with that I'm going to wrap up. Here's some useful links if you're a developer, developer.holochain.org. If you're not, just regular holochain.org. If you're curious about the HoloHost thing, that's there. And if you want to get in touch with me, let's connect. If you got questions, that's my email. If you're on LinkedIn and that's your most comfortable venue, we've got a QR code there. Same with Telegram. And if you just want to book a meeting, you're like, I know exactly what I want to talk about, go ahead and book me on Calendar. All right? Thank you very much.